I'm Evelyn Brandt, 50 years old, and I earned 2 stars in the United States Army, while my own family told everyone I did something with helicopters. For 28 years, I paid their bills from war zones, missed their holidays, and watched my sacrifices get spent under somebody else's name. But when a colonel at a military ball pointed me to the wives' table, and my own mother told me to sit where the man said, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been written off by the very people you gave everything to? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit that like button and subscribe. It was Veterans Day, 1988, and I was 12 years old, standing on a curb in downtown Dayton, Ohio, holding my father's parade program like it was something holy. My father was a high school band director. He spent his whole life teaching teenagers that music was a language, and on that cold November morning, he leaned down to my ear and translated the parade for me, piece by piece, as the formations went past. He named every march. He told me which song belonged to which branch and why the crowd stood for some of them and not for others. And then, when a staff car rolled past with a small flag on its fender, he pointed at the band and said, "Listen close, Evelyn. Those short bursts, the drums and the bugles together. Those are called Ruffles and Flourishes. They only play them for generals." I asked him why. He said, "Because the band never plays by accident. Every note in a military honor means something. Some songs you have to earn." My mother stood 3 feet away from us and heard none of it. She was fixing the ribbon in my little sister Krista's hair because a photographer from the local paper was working the crowd, and my mother believed in being ready for moments like that. That was my family in a single image. My father teaching me the names of things that had to be earned. My mother arranging my sister for things that had to be seen. My mother's name is Sylvia, and to understand anything that happened later, you have to understand the arithmetic she ran her whole life on. In my mother's world, a woman's value was a borrowed number. It came from the man standing next to her. She kept books on every woman in our neighborhood, who married a doctor, who married a dentist, whose husband had the dealership out on Route 40. She would sit at our kitchen table with her coffee and run the figures out loud, and the lesson underneath never changed. When I was 14, she said it to me straight, with no apology, the way you state a law of nature. A woman's life is decided by who she stands next to, Evelyn. Remember that. I remembered it. I just never obeyed it. I was in the marching band because of my father and on the rifle drill team because of something in me that neither of them put there. I liked precision. I liked being squared away. I liked that a drill movement was either correct or it was not, and that nobody's opinion changed which one it was. My sister Krista, 3 years younger, was fluent in our mother's language by the time she was 12. She knew how to enter a room, how to be photographed, how to be adored. I want to be fair to her because this story bends back toward her in the end. She was not cruel as a girl. She was a student of the only curriculum our mother offered, and she got straight A's in it. In the spring of 1994, when I was 18, an envelope came to the house with my name on it. An Army ROTC scholarship. 4 years of college paid in exchange for a commission and a debt of service I wanted to pay anyway. My father read the letter twice at the kitchen table, set it down flat, smoothed it with his hand the way he smoothed sheet music, and said, "Well?" From him, that word was a standing ovation. My mother said the Army was a detour from a real life. She said I was making myself hard to choose. That was her phrase, hard to choose, as if I were produce going soft on a shelf. 4 years later, in May of 1998, I stood on a stage at Ohio State and was commissioned a second lieutenant in the United States Army, branched aviation. I was 22. My father pinned the gold bar to my shoulder with hands that shook a little, and he didn't say a word because he couldn't. There is a photograph from that morning that I still have. My father is beaming at me. I am beaming at the bar, and my mother is at the edge of the frame, angled slightly away, with the expression of a woman attending a stranger's funeral, present, polite, and counting the minutes. She's in the edge of every photograph from that day. I checked once, years later, all of them. Never in the center. The center was for things she approved of. Flight school came the next year, at Fort Rucker, Alabama. I wanted Black Hawks, and I got them. I also got Paula Trask, a lieutenant from Tennessee with a laugh you could hear across a flight line who became the kind of friend the Army gives you exactly once if you're lucky. Paula and I learned to fly the same year, made captain within a month of each other in 2002, and spent the next 2.5 decades holding each other's secrets and salutes. And here is the part I need you to know about those early years, because it matters later. My father's school district cut his stipend in 1999. Band programs are always the first thing on the table when the money runs short. I was a first lieutenant, earning very little, and I started sending money home. Not a fortune, a portion. Every month, quietly, wired into my parents' account because my father had spent 30 years buying reeds and valve oil for kids whose families couldn't, and I was not going to watch him give up the program in his last years before retirement. He thanked me once, privately, in a phone call where his voice went rough. My mother never mentioned it. Not once, not ever, at any dinner, in any year. The money arrived from far away, and like everything that arrived from far away, it was absorbed into the household and credited to whoever was standing closest. I tell you about the parade and the kitchen table and the wire transfers because everything that happened at that ball in April of 2026 was already fully formed in those three things. A father who taught me that honors are earned, a mother who believed they are married, and a family ledger where my contributions were entered, faithfully, under somebody else's name. I gave them my loyalty anyway, for decades. That was my choice, and I'm not sorry for it. But you should know exactly how the scale was loaded before I tell you what finally tipped it. My sister married Captain Mark Delaney in the summer of 2003, and I almost didn't make the wedding. I was 27, a captain myself, flying Blackhawks out of a dust-colored base in Iraq, and I came home on 36 hours of emergency leave that my commander moved a small mountain to approve. I landed with one bag. The only decent clothes inside it were my dress uniform, because nothing else I owned was on that continent. I walked into the church 15 minutes before the ceremony, and my mother's face when she saw me was not relief that I had made it from a war. It was alarm at what I was wearing. She crossed the vestibule, took my arm, and asked in a low voice if I had something else. "This is Krista's day," she said. "Nobody wants a costume in the pictures." A costume. I had a roommate in Baghdad who flew through ground fire in that costume. I said nothing, because it was, in fact, Krista's day, and one thing the Army teaches you early is which fights are worth the altitude. I stood in the back row for the photographs. In half of them, you can't see me at all. The one person who treated me like what I was happened to be the groom. Mark Delaney was an Army captain then, infantry, square-jawed, and earnest, and when we were introduced, he shook my hand like a soldier, asked me what I flew, and listened to the answer. I logged that, the way you log a working radio in a storm. Remember Mark. He comes back at the end of the story, and he earns it. The years after that wedding fell into a pattern so regular you could set a watch by it. I deployed. I missed things. And my mother narrated my absences to the family, like a sportscaster calling a losing season. Thanksgiving of 2010, I was 34 years old, sitting in a plywood operations room in eastern Afghanistan. I had spent that morning as an air mission commander, threading 2 helicopters through a mountain pass in weather that had closed the valley to everyone else to bring soldiers home to their forward base for a hot meal. When I finally got to a phone, my mother answered, and I heard her carry the receiver into the dining room and announce to the whole table, in the bright voice she used for performances, "It's Evelyn. She couldn't be bothered again this year." Laughter. She handed the phone around. I wished 19 relatives a happy Thanksgiving from a war, one at a time, and told none of them what I had done that morning. There was no version of telling them that didn't sound like begging. Then came 2012, the year my father got sick, and the year I learned the exact exchange rate on money sent from far away. He was 68, it went fast, and it went expensive. I was a 36-year-old major by then, unmarried, no kids, and I did what made sense. I paid. The treatments his insurance balked at, the home equipment, and at the end, the funeral home invoice, all of it. Wired through the family account with my mother's name on it, because that was how the account was set up. I flew home for the funeral, sat in the second row, and listened to my father's students play him out. 300 people came. He had conducted most of them at one time or another. At the reception afterward, I was standing close enough to hear my aunt take Krista's hands and say, "Sweetheart, thank you for handling everything. The service, all of it. Your mother told me you took care of things." Krista did not correct her. My mother, standing right there, did not correct her. They let the credit settle onto my sister the way they let everything settle onto my sister, gently, like snow. I learned something that day that I have never forgotten. Money you send from far away gets spent under somebody else's name. Mark retired in 2018 as a lieutenant colonel after 24 good years. At his retirement party in a rented hall in Ohio, my mother stood up, raised her glass, and toasted him as the soldier this family is proudest of. I was 42 years old, a colonel, with my name sitting on a brigade command selection list. I raised my glass. I drank to him. I meant it, even. But across the room, Mark caught my eye over the rim of his glass, and he was the only person in that hall who looked uncomfortable. He knew exactly what a colonel was. He had spent his career working for them. My first star came in 2022 when I was 46. My second came in 2025. I told my family plainly each time in simple words. A brigadier general, a major general, 2 stars. The information went in, and something else came out. My mother told her bridge club I had gotten some office promotion and that I did something with helicopters. And at a family gathering I attended between the 2 stars, my sister delivered the line that I carried around for years afterward, like a stone in my pocket. We were talking about our mother's health, about who checked on her, and Krista waved her hand at my whole existence and said, "Mom's not wrong, you know. It's not like you ever had a real family to take care of." A real family. I had 1,800 soldiers at the time. By then, Krista had built her entire adult identity inside the spouse networks. Coffees, fundraisers, deployment support groups. She was good at it, genuinely good, and I will not mock any of it, because those networks hold the Army together in ways the Army has never fully paid for. But her standing in that world rested on being the family's military authority. The one who had sacrificed, the one who understood. A sister with 2 stars was not a fact she could afford, so she chose not to verify it. People think denial is passive. It isn't. It's a daily decision, renewed each morning, and my family renewed it for 28 years. In the fall of 2025, I was nominated to command an armored division in Texas. 15,000 soldiers, the kind of job the Army gives to maybe a dozen people on Earth at any given moment. The orders were public. Anyone could have read them. My promotion order hung on my refrigerator under a magnet, and 1,100 miles away, my mother told her bridge club her oldest daughter was still single and still doing something with helicopters. That was the state of the board in March of 2026, when I did the thing that set the whole night in motion. The division's annual ball was scheduled for the 4th of April, 11 days before I took command. The incoming commanding general traditionally attends as the guest of honor. And I, 50 years old and apparently still 12, standing on that curb, hoping my mother would turn around and listen to the music, decided to fly her and my sister in for it. I told myself it was generosity. Paula would later call it what it was. One last appeal, filed with a court that had ruled against me before I was old enough to testify. The post-club ballroom on the night of April 4th, 2026, was the Army doing what the Army does well. Flags posted, white tablecloths squared, 500 place settings aligned, and the division band arranged on a low riser at the center rear of the room, tuning quietly under the noise of arriving guests. I had flown my mother and sister in the day before, put them up in guest lodging, and arranged their tickets. I arrived early with the 2 of them, which is how the whole thing became possible. I should explain the gown. 2 weeks earlier, everything I owned had been packed into a moving truck somewhere between my old duty station and Texas, and that truck was late. My mess uniform, the formal evening uniform a general officer would normally wear to a ball, was sealed in a wardrobe box on an interstate in Tennessee. I had a choice between a borrowed uniform that fit wrong and a plain black evening gown from a department store in town. I chose the gown. I want to be honest with you. Part of me liked the idea. My assumption of command was still 11 days out. The division had not seen my face yet, outside of a handful of officers and an official photo on a website nobody reads. For one more evening, I could be invisible, and invisibility is a luxury a general learns to miss. My mother critiqued the gown in the car. "At your age," she said, and let the sentence finish itself, which was her specialty. Krista spent the walk from the parking lot, narrating military protocol to us both, getting most of it wrong, with the confidence of a woman who had been to 100 of these as a guest and absorbed nothing as a fact. I let it go, the altitude rule again. Inside, while my mother and sister found the bar, I drifted to the head table. Habit, mostly. I wanted to see the seating, the way you want to see the terrain before you have to operate in it. The cards were heavy cream stock with formal script. Major General Stuart Glenn, the outgoing commanding general, at the center. the command sergeant major, the division chief of staff. And there, 2 seats from the center, a card that read, Major General Evelyn Brandt. I was standing there, reading my own name, feeling the strange weight of it, when a hand closed around my elbow. He was tall, silver at the temples, immaculate in dress mess, with a colonel's eagles on his sleeves and the brisk certainty of a man solving a small problem on his way to larger ones. Colonel Dwight Renner, the Host Brigade Commander. I knew his name from the division org chart I had been studying for a month. He did not know mine. He turned me, gently but firmly, the way you steer guests, and he pointed clear across the ballroom to the tables in the far back corner by the coat check, and he actually squinted while he pointed. One eye closed, sighting along his own arm at the distance, as if to say, "Way out there. See it?" "Wives sit over there," he said. "The head table is for the official party, ma'am." And then, while I stood there with my clutch in both hands, he reached past me, slid my name card off the tablecloth, and held it without reading it, the way you hold something you intend to throw away later. I want to freeze this moment, because everyone always asks me what I felt, and the honest answer is that I felt 12 years old, and also 50, and also nothing at all. 28 years, 2 wars, 2 stars pinned by 2 different secretaries of the army, and a man holding my name in his hand, pointing me toward the corner where the wives sat. My mother was 8 feet away. She had heard every word, and my mother, who had flown 1,100 miles on a ticket I bought, leaned toward me and said, in her low public voice, the one that managed me in churches and at weddings, "For heaven's sake, don't make a scene. Sit where the man tells you." Behind her, my sister had the small, satisfied smile of a woman watching the natural order reassert itself. I looked at the colonel, I looked at the corner, and I said, "Of course." 2 words. I stepped back from the head table, and I walked with my mother and sister toward the back of the room, and I let them seat me at a spouse table by the coat check, and I folded my hands on the white tablecloth and waited. Krista patted my arm. She was kind about it. That was somehow the worst part. What Colonel Renner did not know, what none of them knew, was that 10 minutes later the protocol of the United States Army was going to speak for me, and protocol does not whisper. At 1900 hours exactly, Captain Olivia Shaw, the division adjutant, stepped to the microphone, and the room hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "please rise for the official party." 500 chairs slid back. The names rolled out in order of precedence, each one crossing the floor to the head table, as it was called. And then Captain Shaw paused, the way adjutants are taught to pause, and said, "And the guest of honor, Major General Evelyn Brandt, incoming commanding general." The band hit it on the first beat. 2 ruffles and flourishes, the drums and bugles together, short and bright as a blade coming out, and then the general's march underneath. The music my father taught me to name when I was 12 years old on a curb in Dayton, played in a ballroom in Texas, for me. I stood up from the wives' table in the far back corner, and I walked the entire length of that floor alone. 500 people on their feet. I passed my mother, whose face had simply stopped working, the arithmetic of an entire lifetime failing to balance behind her eyes. I passed my sister, who had gone white. And I passed Colonel Dwight Renner, locked at attention near the head table, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the middle distance. And in his right hand, perfectly visible, the cream place card he had never gotten around to throwing away. My name, in his hand, at the position of attention. Major General Glenn met me at the head table and shook my hand. "General Brandt," he said, warm and loud enough to carry. "Welcome to the division." I took my seat 2 chairs from center, where my card had been, and the band resolved its last phrase, and 500 chairs slid back in. From that seat, I could see the whole room. The corner table by the coat check looked very far away. My father was 14 years gone, but I heard him anyway, clear as November. Some songs you have to earn. Colonel Renner did not eat that night. I know, because I watched. The ball ended the way balls end, with speeches and a cake cut by the oldest and youngest soldier in the division, and a receiving line I stood in for 40 minutes while majors and sergeants and lieutenant states worked up the nerve to shake my hand. My mother and sister waited by the doors. We rode back to guest lodging in a silence so dense the driver turned the radio on. It broke in the kitchenette at 11:40 at night over decaffeinated coffee nobody drank. I had imagined for years what my mother might say if she ever truly saw it. I had imagined wrong. Sylvia Brandt set down her cup, looked at me with an expression I had last seen the day I told her about the scholarship, and said, "You let me believe you were nobody. You did this to embarrass me. You did this to me." 50 years old, and the sentence still found the 12-year-old on the curb with the accuracy of something fired from close range. Not, "Why didn't I listen?" Not, "What have I missed?" The humiliation was hers, the injury was hers, and I was its author. I had spent 28 years writing her letters she skimmed, telling her plainly at every promotion exactly what the rank meant, mailing her a photograph from each ceremony. The evidence had never been hidden. It had been inadmissible. Krista's contribution came from the doorway, arms crossed. "You could have just said something at the table, before he moved your card. You let it happen and made everyone feel stupid." I looked at my sister for a long moment, and for once in my life, I said the quiet thing plainly. "I have been saying it for 28 years, Krista. I said it at your wedding. I said it at Dad's funeral. I said it when they pinned each star. You both decided it wasn't true, because my life only fit in your house if it stayed small. A band and 500 soldiers can't tell you anything I haven't already told you. The difference is you couldn't talk over them." Nobody answered. My mother turned her cup a quarter turn on its saucer, which was what she did instead of conceding, and my sister studied the floor. I realized, standing in that kitchenette, that I had pictured this exact conversation 100 times over the years. And in every version I had imagined, the hard part was making them believe me. It had never once occurred to me that they could watch a ballroom stand, hear a band play honors written into Army regulation, watch a major general shake my hand by name, and still find a way to make the evening about what I had done to them. There is no brief you can give against that. There is no witness you can call. I rinsed my cup, said goodnight, and went to my room, and at 2 a.m, wide awake, staring at a ceiling in Texas, I called Paula Trask. Paula had retired a colonel in 2024 and now answered her phone at 2 a.m. The way she had answered it for 25 years, instantly, as if she had been sitting there waiting to be useful. I told her all of it. The card, the corner, the squint, my mother's verdict in the kitchenette. Paula was quiet for a second, and then she said the thing I have repeated to myself probably 1,000 times since. "You didn't fly them in to watch a ball, Ev. You flew them in for a verdict. You've been appealing the same case your whole life, to the same 2 judges, and the court was rigged before you took your first oath. Stop appealing. You won the case years ago. Everyone can see the ruling except you." I laughed, and then I didn't. Because she was right, and the proof of how right she was lay in how the evening had actually felt. The band had played. 500 people had stood. And my first thought, walking that floor, my very first thought, had been to look at my mother's table and check her face. 2 stars on my shoulders, 11 days from then. And I was still checking her face. I sat on the porch of the guest quarters until dawn, with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands, watching the installation come awake around me. Physical training formations moving in the half-dark. The first aircraft turning up on the airfield, a sound I could identify in my sleep, the way other people know their own children's voices. Somewhere out there were 15,000 soldiers who would be mine in 11 days, most of whom now knew exactly one thing about me, and the one thing they knew was true. It struck me as funny, in the gray hour before sunrise, that an entire division of strangers had a more accurate file on me than my own mother did. And then it stopped being funny, and I did the unglamorous accounting that real change actually requires. I had given my family money, time, loyalty, and the benefit of the doubt for almost 3 decades. None of that had been wrong. Generosity is not a mistake. But I had also given them something else, something I had no business giving anyone. I had given them jurisdiction, the power to rule on whether my life counted. My father had never needed to rule on it. He had simply watched it, with interest like a man listening to a piece of music he loved. Somewhere after he died, I had transferred the whole docket to 2 people who had never once listened past the opening bars. The verdict I needed was my own. You stand at 50 years old, on a porch in Texas, watching an installation wake up around me. I finally issued it. That morning, before my mother and sister flew home, a note arrived at my temporary office. Handwritten, on plain stationery, in a careful hand. Colonel Dwight Renner presented his compliments and requested to report to the incoming commanding general in person, at her convenience. No excuses in it, no explanation, just the request. I read it twice, put it in the desk drawer, and decided to let it sit there until I had decided what kind of commander I was going to be in this division. He had insulted Evelyn at 1900 hours. He would report to General Brandt. The two of us needed to agree on which one answered the door. I drew 2 boundaries that week, one for my family and one for my colonel. Of the 2, the family one cost more. I took my mother and sister to breakfast before their flight in a diner off post, and when the plates were cleared, I said what I had rehearsed on the porch. I kept my voice level, the briefing voice, because anything warmer would have been mistaken for an opening. Mom, nothing about the practical things changes. The account stays open. If you're sick, I'm there. If the roof leaks, it gets fixed. That's not on the table, and it never will be. But the rest of it is over. I'm done explaining my life to people who are committed to misunderstanding it. I won't audition anymore, and I won't attend gatherings where I'm the family joke. When you're ready to know me, I'm easy to find. I wear a name tag to work. My mother cycled through her repertoire in order. Outrage first, then the trembling lip, then the classic, delivered with her chin up. After everything I've done for you. I let it land, and for the first time in my life, I did not pick it up. There's a kind of silence I learned in the army, the silence after you give an order you know was right. I paid the check and drove them to the airport, and my mother looked out the window the whole way. Krista opened fire from the gate, by text, a long thread that arrived in bursts through the afternoon. I was cruel, I was cold, I had pulled rank on my own family. I read the whole thread standing in my empty new headquarters, 15,000 soldiers worth of responsibility waiting in the files on my desk, and I typed one reply. No rank here, just a boundary. I love you. Tell me when accuracy starts mattering to you, because that's the only door in. Then I put the phone in the drawer with Renner's note, which it seemed to belong with. Renner reported on Thursday at 0900 in his service uniform, with the bearing of a man walking to his own court-martial. He marched to the front of my desk, halted, saluted, and held it. Ma'am, Colonel Renner reporting as requested. I returned the salute and let him stand at ease, and he got his piece out before I could speak. He had drafted it carefully. I could tell because men like Renner draft everything carefully, which is partly how a ballroom happens. Ma'am, there is no excuse for what I did, so I won't insult you with one. I judged you by where you were standing and what you were wearing. If you require my resignation from brigade command, you'll have it in writing by close of business. 4 minutes. That is how long the conversation took that decided what kind of division I was going to run. And I have thought about those 4 minutes more than almost anything else from that spring. Colonel, I said, if I ended every career that ever underestimated a woman in a gown, the army would run short of colonels by Friday. You made an assumption. So does everyone. The question in front of you is not whether you're finished. The question is what you build out of it. You have a formation full of young soldiers who learned their assumptions the same place you learned yours. Fix the culture that taught it to you, starting with your own brigade. That's not a suggestion. He blinked. Whatever he had braced for, it was not employment. How, ma'am? Start with your spouse programs. Start with who your soldiers assume belongs where, and who has to prove what to whom at your gates, your front desks, and your head tables. Rewrite your ball protocol so the next woman standing where I stood gets asked her name before she gets shown a corner. You hold the after-action review yourself. Dismissed. He saluted, and at the door he stopped, and without turning fully around, he said, My wife told me what you did at the wives' table, ma'am. That you just sat down. She said it was the most officer thing she'd ever seen anyone do in a gown. Then he left, before I had to decide what my face should do with that. Word of the ball moved through the division faster than the official photos did, and it moved in a shape I had not expected. I have spent my whole career watching how stories travel through formations. The official version goes out in an email nobody reads. The real version goes out at the smoke pit, in the motor pool, in the chow line, edited for maximum truth and maximum entertainment, and there is nothing any commander can do about it, except live in a way that survives the telling. The story the soldiers passed around was not the colonel humiliating the general. It was the general who sat at the wives' table without a word, and the band that answered for her. Command Sergeant Major Lonnie Pruitt, who had been the division's senior enlisted soldier for 2 years, and would shortly be mine, delivered the enlisted verdict in my doorway that Friday with the economy of his tribe. Ma'am, the soldiers heard what you didn't do. That bought you more than the band did. My mother sent 1 letter that month. 4 pages of grievance in looping cursive, every sentence a receipt for something she had done for me before I was 18. The braces, the piano lessons I had quit, a dress for a homecoming dance in 1992. There was no apology anywhere in it, not even in the neighborhood of one, and the closing line asked when I planned to apologize to her. The old me would have answered it point by point, 4 pages of my own, a staff response with enclosures. The new me read it once at my desk, understood it for what it was, the opening offer in a negotiation I was no longer attending, returned it to its envelope, and put it in the drawer, which was getting crowded. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors with working locks, and for the first time in my life, I held the key on my side. What I did not plan, and could not have planned, was the video. Someone's guest at someone's table had a phone out when Captain Shaw stepped to the microphone, and the clip they posted ran 31 seconds. You hear the announcement. You hear the first ruffle hit, drums and bugles together, and the room standing in one long ripple. And then the camera swings and finds me, a woman in a plain black gown, rising from the table in the far back corner by the coat check and starting the long walk. Whoever filmed it whispered one word just off mic. The word was, wait. 31 seconds. It went through the division's spouse networks in about a week, and then it jumped, the way these things jump, to the wider ecosystem of Army spouse pages, and that is how it arrived, with no help from me, in the exact center of my sister's world. Krista's friends were thrilled. That was the unbearable part, she told me much later. There was no scandal in it for her to manage. Her phone filled up with women she had known for 20 years, asking why she had never mentioned her sister, the general, the one in the video, the one the whole room stood for. Her currency, her one currency, had been being the family's military authority, and the video revealed in 31 seconds that she had been outranked in her own economy since before her wedding, and had either not known, which was embarrassing, or had known and hidden it, which was worse. Denial is a daily decision. The video made the daily price public. Mark watched the clip alone in his garage. Twice. I know because Krista told me, and what he did next is why I told you at the wedding to remember Mark. He went inside, sat his wife down at their kitchen table, and gave her, by her own account, the only briefing of his retirement. I made it 24 years, he said, and I retired 3 pay grades below your sister. Do you understand what 2 stars is? Every door I ever walked through in that uniform, she walked through it first, with people on the other side, doubting she belonged there. Your family has spent 20 years thanking me for my service at the same table where you all called her selfish. You should be ashamed. I am. My mother's reckoning came at the bridge table, which was the only courtroom whose rulings she had ever respected. She had played with the same 3 women every Thursday for 30 years. Those women had heard 3 decades of commentary on my failures to marry, my failures to visit, my failure, in the general case, to become anyone. They were her jury and her archive, and she had testified in front of them every week since the Reagan administration. A friend's granddaughter had seen the video. The questions, Krista reported, were gentle, and they were fatal. Why didn't you tell us your daughter is a general? Is that really her? Weren't you at that ball? My mother, who had narrated my life for decades to that exact audience as a cautionary tale about women who choose careers, sat holding her cards with no version of the story left that survived contact with the footage. She came home from bridge that day, Krista said, and didn't call anyone for a week, which for my mother was a medical event. I want to be careful here, because this is the part of the story where I'm supposed to enjoy myself. And the truth is, I didn't. I did not want my mother sitting silent by her phone. I did not want my sister losing sleep over what her friends thought. I had wanted, my whole life, exactly one thing from them, which was to be seen accurately. And it turns out that for people who have organized their lives around not seeing you, the seeing is the suffering. There was nothing for me to add to it, and nothing I could subtract from it. So I went to work, and I let the truth do what it had waited 28 years to do, at its own pace, in its own rooms, none of which I was in. Then, in the second week, an envelope arrived at my office with Krista's return address, and inside it was something I had not seen in 14 years. The funeral home invoice from 2012, my father's name at the top, paid in full by wire transfer with the originating account number visible, my account, my name. She had found it going through our mother's papers. There was a sticky note on it, yellow, in my sister's handwriting, and it said, I know who paid this. I knew at the reception, and I let them thank me anyway. I have been letting people thank me for you my whole life. I'm sorry, you don't have to answer this. No request attached, no invitation, no occasion I was being softened up for, no ask. Just the first completely accurate sentence my family had produced about me in years, mailed to the exact site of the oldest theft. I sat with that invoice for a long time. Renner's transformation, meanwhile, proceeded with the thoroughness of a man who only knows one speed. His brigade rewrote its ball protocol, top to bottom. Escort procedures, seating verification, a standing instruction that no guest is ever directed anywhere by assumption. His after-action review, which he chaired himself, opened with the sentence, "On 4 April, I personally removed the incoming Commanding General's place card from the head table, and I am going to walk you through every decision that made that possible." A sergeant who was in that room told Pruitt, who told me, that you could have heard a pin drop on carpet. And somewhere in those weeks I overheard, through an open door, a young soldier summarize the new state of the division to his battle buddy. "The new CG doesn't need the room to clap for her. The band already did." I carried those 2 sentences around for a week, smiling like an idiot at the motor pool. I didn't want them to suffer. Any of them. I wanted them to see. It turns out the seeing is the suffering, for a while. And then, if there is anything underneath it, the seeing becomes something else. Krista asked for coffee 2 weeks after the ball. Not forgiveness, coffee. She flew down on her own ticket, met me at a place off-post with mismatched chairs and good light, and she did not bring a single flower or apology card, or any of the staging our family had always used in place of substance. She brought specifics. That is how I knew it was real. She apologized for the wedding photographs by name, the ones I am missing from. She apologized for the funeral, for standing in the reception line, collecting thanks for money I had wired from the other side of an ocean. She apologized for real family, and she did not soften it or explain what she had really meant, because we both knew she had meant exactly what she said. And then she set down her cup and gave me the sentence that explained 20 years better than any therapist could have. "I built my whole life out of being married to the Army, Ev. The coffees, the committees, the support groups. It's the only thing I've ever been an expert in. And then there's you. You are the Army. Do you understand what that did to me every time someone asked about my family? I couldn't afford for you to be true." I could have made it easy. I am her older sister, and 40-some years of instinct leaned across that table, wanting to make it easy. I didn't. Repair that costs nothing, holds nothing. "You don't owe me admiration," I told her. "I have never once needed you to clap. You owe me accuracy, that's all. That's the whole bill. When Mom tells the funeral story wrong, you fix it. When somebody calls me selfish at a table you're sitting at, you say what you know. You don't have to celebrate me, Krista. You have to stop editing me." She cried, briefly and without performance, which for a Brant woman is practically a moonshot. We sat with it for a minute, 2 middle-aged sisters in a coffee shop, 40 years of family architecture, quietly being condemned and rebuilt between the cream and the sugar. Then she asked what accuracy looked like in practice, and I could hear that she actually wanted the answer, the way a new lieutenant wants the answer, not the absolution. I said, "You'll know it when it costs you something." It cost her 11 days later. An aunt retold the funeral story on the family group chat, the version where Krista handled everything, and my sister typed, where every relative we have could see it and nothing could be unsaid. Actually, that was Evelyn. She paid for all of it from Afghanistan. I let everyone believe it was me, and I'm correcting that now. Then she called me, slightly breathless, like a soldier back from a first patrol. I understood completely. Telling the truth in our family was a contact sport, and she had just taken her first hit and stayed standing. Mark and I had our repair in a commissary parking lot, which is the most Army possible location for it. 10 minutes between his cart and my car. He didn't apologize because he had nothing to apologize for. He was the one member of that family who had always shaken my hand like a soldier. We talked about his consulting work, my gunnery schedule, his daughters, and then, as I turned to go, Mark Delaney, retired lieutenant colonel, 24 years of service, came to attention in a commissary parking lot in Texas and saluted me. He held it. He is retired. No regulation on earth required it. That is precisely the point of it, and we both knew it, and neither of us said a word about it because some things are only true if you don't explain them. My mother was not ready, and I let her not be ready. She called in May, and the first 2 minutes were warm, genuinely warm, questions about my quarters and the Texas heat. Then the old machinery engaged, and the call slid sideways into, "If you had just told us properly," the thesis that the failure had been mine, of presentation, a briefing error, 28 years of insufficiently clear formatting. The old me would have relitigated it. The new me, the one issued on a porch at dawn in April, said, "Mom, I love you, and I'm going to go now. When you're ready to be glad for me instead of embarrassed by me, I'll be here. There's no deadline. The door doesn't lock from my side anymore." And I hung up kindly and went back to work and did not spend the evening rehearsing the call, which was new. Paula called that Sunday for her check-in, and our entire exchange on the subject ran 4 words each. "Verdict's in," she asked. "Case dismissed," I said. "Court's closed." People ask me, when I tell pieces of the story, why I didn't cut them all off entirely. It's the fashionable answer, and I understand its appeal. But I had not spent 28 years learning command to come home and practice abandonment. You don't burn a unit down because it failed an inspection. You retrain it, you set standards, you check, and you accept that some soldiers meet the standard late and some never do, and the standard stands either way. My family got the same deal my battalions always got: clear expectations, real consequences, and an honest road back. I could feel it then, the thing I had been building without naming it. Not the cold satisfaction people expect from stories like mine, something quieter and infinitely more useful. 2 relationships rebuilt at honest prices, one held at a kind distance with the porch light on, and at the center of it, for the first time in my adult life, a woman who had stopped billing herself for other people's blindness. At the coffee shop, when the check came, Krista and I split it evenly. Neither of us said anything. Both of us noticed. After a lifetime of me quietly paying, under the table, under her name, under the radar, my sister and I each put down half, and somehow that ordinary arithmetic, 2 women, 1 check, divided by 2, was the most honest math our family had ever done. I took command of the division on April 17th, 2026, on a parade field under a hard blue Texas sky, 13 days after a colonel pointed me to the corner of a ballroom. If you have never seen an assumption of command, it is the Army's oldest sentence written in bodies and cloth. The division stood in formation, 15,000 soldiers represented by their colors, every battalion's flag heavy with streamers from wars my father taught me about and wars I flew in. The ceremony itself is almost unbearably simple, which is why it works. No speeches matter. What matters is one object changing hands. Major General Glenn took the division colors, the actual cloth and staff that 15,000 soldiers marched behind, and passed them to Command Sergeant Major Pruitt, the keeper of the standard, who turned and passed them to me. The weight surprised me, which the old hands tell you it always does, and I gripped the staff and held it for the long moment the ceremony requires, and felt 28 years close a circuit. A second lieutenant who sent half her paycheck home to keep a band program alive. A captain in a borrowed church pew in a uniform her mother called a costume. A major wiring funeral money from a war. A colonel toasting another soldier at his retirement, while her own selection list sat unmentioned in her bag. All of them holding the staff with me. The band played. Of course the band played. This time I was in uniform, 2 stars on each shoulder, and there was no corner in any direction, and not one person on that field wondered where I was supposed to be standing. I had sent my mother an invitation, plain, no note attached. I looked for her once during the ceremony, from the reviewing stand, the old reflex aiming my eyes before I could stop it, and I found her. Last row of the bleachers, in her good navy coat, sunglasses on, hands folded, unreadable. She came. She sat in the back. She left before the receiving line and was gone before I could cross the field, and she did not call that night. Krista's text arrived at 9. "She cried in the car. Don't ask me what kind of crying. I honestly don't know." I read it twice, standing in my new quarters, surrounded by boxes the moving company had finally delivered, my mess uniform hanging in the closet at last. 3 weeks too late for the ball, and exactly on time for everything after. I decided that not knowing was, itself, progress. For my whole life, my mother's reactions to me had been legible from orbit. Disappointment is a clear signal, loud and on every frequency. Whatever this was, sunglasses in the last row, tears in a rental car, silence instead of commentary, it was new weather. And new weather means the climate is capable of change. And then weeks passed, and the strangest thing about them was how good they were. Command consumed me in the way that honest work consumes you, the way flying used to. Motor pools at dawn, walking tank lines with sergeants who tested me politely, to see whether the aviator knew what she was looking at. Gunnery tables out at the ranges, the ground shaking in a way you feel in your back teeth. A division to learn, battalion by battalion, name by name, and a command philosophy to make real one decision at a time. Pruitt ran my calendar like a metronome and corrected my pronunciation of every first sergeant's name before I met them. I noticed somewhere in mid-May that I had stopped checking my personal phone with dread. I would look at it at lunch the way you look at weather for somewhere else. The storm I had tracked for 50 years had moved off my coast. What was left was just my life, and it fit me, and it was full. Renner surfaced in May with a request that told me everything about where he had landed. His brigade had rebuilt its family programs from the studs, and he asked, through channels, formally, whether the commanding general would present the awards at his spouse volunteer recognition night in June. The man who had pointed me to a corner was asking me to stand at the front of his formation and honor the people who sat at those tables. I wrote one word on the request and sent it back. Approved. Then late in May, Krista called on a Tuesday, and partway through the ordinary catalog of nieces and weather, she lowered her voice as if our mother could hear her across 4 states. She's been at the kitchen table every night this week, Krista said. She got Dad's old stationery box down from the closet. The good paper, the cream stock he used for recommendation letters. She sits there after dinner with the radio on and writes and crosses out and starts over. There's a pile of crossed out pages she burns in the morning like evidence. Ev, I asked her what it was, and she looked at me like I'd asked her something indecent. Whatever it is, she keeps starting over. I sat with that image for days. My mother at her kitchen table, with my dead father's good paper, drafting and burning, drafting and burning. I did not call and ask. You cannot order honesty up like close air support. It comes when it comes, or it doesn't come at all. I had stopped waiting for my mother's verdict. I want you to understand that this is true, not a thing I tell myself. The case was closed in April, on the porch, for good. And yet, somewhere in the mail system between Ohio and Texas, there was, or there was not, an envelope. I had stopped waiting. Which is, I suspect, the only reason she was finally able to write. The letter arrived on the last Friday of May, in a cream envelope addressed in handwriting I would know anywhere. The same hand that had signed permission slips and disapproval for 50 years. I made myself coffee. I sat at the table in my quarters by the window. And I read my mother's 3 pages slowly, the way my father taught me to listen to music, all the way through, without skipping ahead. It was not a perfect letter. I need you to know that, because perfect letters are how movies end, and this is not a movie. It was cramped and proud, and it took 2 full paragraphs to clear its throat. The first page relitigated nothing and apologized for nothing. It reported on the weather in Ohio, on a neighbor's hip replacement, on the tomatoes she was putting in early this year, as if she needed a running start at the truth from somewhere ordinary. I recognized the strategy, because it is mine. You approach the hard target from a familiar heading, but buried in the middle of page 2, my mother, Sylvia Brandt, 78 years old, wrote this. I spent 50 years telling you that a woman is decided by who she stands next to. At that ball, 500 people stood next to you, and I finally understood that I had it backwards the whole time. I wasn't embarrassed by you, Evelyn. I was embarrassed by me. And I made you carry it, because you were the strong one, and you always carried whatever I handed you without complaining, and that is the part I cannot stop thinking about. There was a photograph folded into page 3. My father, mid-downbeat, in front of his high school band, 1980s sometime. Shirt sleeves, baton up, his whole face alive. On the back, in her hand. He would have walked you to that table himself. And then the last lines of the letter, the ones she had saved, the ones I suspect cost her the pile of burned pages. Your father used to say the band only plays for those who earn it. I thought he was talking about music. He was talking about you. I am sorry it took me until the music to hear him. Love, Mom. I read it twice. I sat for a while in the quiet. And then I did the only thing there was to do, which was something small and ordinary. I watered the plant on the windowsill. I rinsed my cup. Grief and relief turn out to use the same muscles. Peace, when it finally arrives, does not arrive with honors. It arrives like this. A letter, a photograph, a Tuesday's worth of light on an ordinary table. She visited in the first week of June. No ballroom, no audience, no occasion to perform. A kitchen table dinner in my quarters, chicken and rice, nothing fancy. She arrived with a casserole dish she didn't need to bring and stood in my doorway for a second too long before she came in, taking in the quarters, the flag in its stand, the photographs, the life. My mother asked me real questions about my work for the first time in my life, and then she did the harder thing. The thing I will remember at her funeral someday. She listened to the answers. She asked what an air mission commander does. She asked about the soldiers, their ages, whether their mothers worry. She asked, quietly, near the end, what it had been like to fly in weather, far from home, on the Thanksgivings she had narrated to the family as selfishness. I told her, gently, some of it. Krista joined by speakerphone for dessert and stayed an hour. It was imperfect and unforced, and entirely enough. The spouse volunteer recognition night at Renner's Brigade came the next week. I presented the awards, shook 40 hands, and listened to a colonel give a toast I never saw coming. Renner raised his glass to the volunteers, thanked them properly, and then looked down the head table at his commanding general and finished with this. This brigade learned something this year. You cannot tell who anyone is by where they're standing. The room laughed, the good kind of laughter, the kind a unit makes when it has actually changed and knows it. Afterward, he handed me a flat package, wrapped in plain paper. Inside was a small frame, and inside the frame, pressed under glass, was a cream place card with my name on it in formal script. He had kept it, all those weeks. I figured, ma'am, he said, that I should finally put it where it belongs. It sits on my bookshelf now, next to the photograph of my father conducting. The card a colonel couldn't put down, beside the man who taught me what the music meant. My two favorite witnesses. Some evenings when the day lets me go on time, I stand outside division headquarters at 1700 as retreat sounds across the post. The traffic stops, the flag comes down slow, and I stand at attention, alone on the steps, 50 years old, 28 years in, 2 stars up, exactly where I earned the right to stand. And I think about a 12-year-old on a curb in Dayton mouthing the words, Ruffles and Flourishes, like a secret she was keeping even from herself. So let me say the last part directly to you because you stayed with me this far and you didn't do that by accident. If the people who were supposed to know you best are the last ones to see you clearly, hear me. You do not need their verdict to be true. Close the case yourself. Live like the evidence. Do the work. Send the money if you choose to. Love them from whatever distance keeps you whole. And let the truth travel at its own speed, because it does travel. Sooner or later, even the doubters hear the music. And if they never do, the song was still yours. Every note of it. That's my story. A colonel pointed me to a corner, my mother told me to sit in it, and the band answered for both of them. But the part I hope you take with you isn't the music. It's the porch at dawn, the morning I finally closed the case and stopped appealing my own life to people who had ruled on it before they ever read it. So I'd love to hear from you. Has someone in your family ever decided who you were and refused to update the file no matter what you achieved? Did the people who doubted you ever finally hear the music? Or are you still living like the evidence anyway? And if you've ever sat quietly at the wrong table, knowing exactly who you were, what kept you composed in that moment? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and so do thousands of people who needed to hear that they're not the only ones. If this story hit home, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Thank you for spending this time with me. Wherever you're listening from, I hope you find your peace. You've already earned it.